Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Very warm welcome to this Monday, 20th March 2023 morning Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam discussion. Today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 7, Text 10. Before we discuss on this verse, let's sing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jai Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe, Jai Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Shri Radhe, Jai Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura, Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahaṁsa Pariyojakacarya Stottra Shati Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय, मथुरा धाम की जय, जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय, मायापुर धाम की जय, गंगा माई की जय, यमुना माई की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, सामवेद भक्त वृंद की जय। All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paśāta Deshatarine. Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamastu Krishne Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Text 7, Chapter 7, Text 10. Nābher asāv ṛṣabha āsa sudevi-sūnur yavai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. Nābher asāv ṛṣabha āsa sudevi-sūnur yavai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. Nābher asāv ṛṣabha āsa sudevi-sūnur yavai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. Word by word. Nābhe, by Maharaj Nābhi. Asāv, the personality of Godhead. Ṛṣabha, Ṛṣabha. Asa became Sudevī, Sudevī. Sūnuh, the son of. Yah, who. Why, certainly. Cacāra, performed. Sama-dṛg, equibalanced. Jaḍa, material. Yoga-caryām, performance of yoga. Yat, which. Pāramahaṁsyam, the highest stage of perfection. ṛṣayaḥ, the learned sages. Padam, situation. āmananti, do accept. Svasthaḥ, self-reposed. praśānta, suspended. Karaṇaḥ, the material senses. Parimukta, perfectly liberated. Saṅgaḥ, material contamination. Translation: the Lord appeared as the son of Sudevī, the wife of King Nābhi, and was known as Ṛṣabhadeva. He performed materialistic yoga to equibalance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated in oneself and is completely satisfied. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. Out of many types of mystic performances for self-realization, the process of jaḍa yoga is also one accepted by authorities. The jaḍa yoga involves practicing becoming like a dumb stone and not being affected by material reactions. Just as a stone is indifferent to all kinds of attacks and re-attacks of external situations, similarly, one practices jaḍa yoga by tolerating voluntary inflictions of pain upon the material body. Such yogis, out of many self-infliction methods, practice plucking out the hairs on their heads without shaving and without any instrumental help. But the real purpose of such jaḍa yoga practice is to get free from all material affection and to be completely situated in the self. At the last stage of his life, Emperor Ṛṣabhadeva wandered like a dumb madman, unaffected by all kinds of bodily mistreatment. seeing him like a madman wandering naked with long hair and long beard. Less intelligent children and men in the street used to spit on him and urinate on his body. He used to lie in his own stool and never move, but the stool of his body was fragrant like the smell of fragrant flowers. And a saintly person would recognize him as paramahaṁsa, one in the highest state of human perfection. One who is not able to make his stool fragrant should not, however, imitate Emperor Ṛṣabhadeva. The practice of jaḍa yoga was possible for Ṛṣabhadeva and others on the same level of perfection, but such an uncommon practice is impossible for an ordinary man. The real purpose of jaḍa yoga, as mentioned here in this verse, is praśānta-karaṇaḥ, or subduing the senses. The whole process of yoga, under whatever heading it may be, is to control the unbridled material senses and thus prepare oneself for self-realization. In this age specifically, this jaḍa yoga cannot be of any practical value, but on the other hand, the practice of bhakti yoga is feasible because it is suitable for this age. The simple method of hearing from the right source, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, will lead one to highest perfectional stage of yoga. Ṛṣabhadeva was the son of King Nābhi and the grandson of King Agnidhara, and he was the father of King Bharata, after whose name this planet Earth was called Bharatavarsha. Ṛṣabhadeva's mother was also known as Meru Devi, although her name is mentioned here as Sudevī. It is sometimes proposed that Sudevī was another wife of King Nābhi, but King Ṛṣabhadeva is mentioned elsewhere as a son of Meru Devi. It is clear that Meru Devi and Sudevī are the same person under different names. Before we discuss on this verse, let us offer some prayers. Om Jnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Namashreshtham Manamapi Shachiputram Matra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Murupurim Mathurim Goshthavati Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Krupaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Adanandastranam Dante Idam Yachaha Punaha Punaha Shriman Rupa Padambhojam Dhulisyam Janma Janmani. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 10. Nābher asāv ṛṣabha āsa sudevi-sūnur yo vai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. The Lord appeared as a son of Sudevī, the wife of King Nābhi, and was known as Ṛṣabhadeva. He performed materialistic yoga to equibalance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated in oneself and is completely satisfied. Here, the incarnation of the Lord as Ṛṣabhadeva is being mentioned. And Ṛṣabhadeva has got a very wonderful instruction in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Nāyam deho deha bhajam nraloke kashtan kaman arhate vidbhujanye tapo divyam putraka yena shuddhyet sattva yasmad brahma saukyam tvanantam. So this is the instruction of Ṛṣabhadeva to his sons. So he says that Nayam deho deha bhajam nraloke. So in this material world, when one gets the human form of life, nradeha madhyam sulabham sudurlabham plavam sukalpam gurukarnadharam mayanukulena nabhasvateritam puman bhavadbhyanataret sa atmaha. So this nradeha, or this human form of body, is very rare. It is mentioned durlabham manusham janma. So Prahlad Maharaj also says that this human form of life is very rare. And Ṛṣabhadeva, through his personal example, actually showed how to use the human form of life in remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here, if we look at the jaḍa-yoga-caryām, so let's try and understand this verse through the 4 lines that is mentioned here. So nābher asāv ṛṣabha asa sudevi-sūnur. In the first line of this verse, it is mentioned that Ṛṣabhadeva is the son of Maharaj Nābhi and his mother Sudevī, Devi Sudevī. So that's the first line that mentions his father and mother's name. Ṛṣabhadeva's father's name is Nābhi and his mother's name is Sudevī. Sūnur. Sūnur is the son. Nanda Sūna. So Krishna is called as Nanda Sūna. Nanda Nandana. So he is the son of Nanda Maharaj. So here it is mentioned Sudevī-sūnur. Nābher Sudevī-sūnur. He is the son of Maharaj Nābhi and Sudevī. Then if we look at the second line of this verse, Yovai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām. So he practiced the method of jaḍa yoga. And Srila Prabhupada gives an explanation of jaḍa yoga in the purport. Srila Prabhupada mentions what jaḍa yoga is. So jaḍa vidya sab mayara vaibhav tohar bhajane badha. So this is mentioned by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He says that this material education that we take, it is all the wonderful glorious position of the material world. So jaḍa vidya sab mayara vaibhav tohare bhajana badha. So it is said that when one gets intoxicated by the material qualifications that one has, when the false ego just gets lifted to a massive proportion, one is not able to understand the original situation of the human form of life. Tohare bhajane badha. So it is mentioned that when one is totally influenced by the material qualification and material education, unfortunately, that becomes an hindrance in the path of spiritual progress. But what we have to understand here is the hindrance happens when one thinks that under the influence of false ego, one thinks that I have acquired so much. I've acquired this degree and that degree. So this is ahankara vimodhatma kartaham iti manyade. Ya pashyati tathatmanam akartaram sa pashyati. Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvasha. So it's very important to understand that whatever is happening within the material body, it is under the context of the 3 modes of material nature. Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvasha. Ya pashyati tathatmanam akartaram sa pashyati. So who is the real seer? The real seer is the person who sees that actually all the work is being done by the modes of material nature, and the real self is not doing anything. Ya pashyati tathatmanam akartaram. The real self is not doing anything. So, what is the real self doing? The real self is constantly in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's why Krishna says, Mama eva amsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanātana. Manaha shashtan indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. So, all the living entities in this whole universe are eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, what do we mean by part and parcel? Part and parcel means that the part and parcel has to work for the whole. So Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the finger, for example. So the finger is under the direction of the brain. So the brain is sending the signals and the finger is doing accordingly. So if the finger starts to act independent of the, so it is mentioned by Krishna, Indriyani parani ahur indriyabhya paramana, yo manasastu paro buddhe, yo buddhe paratastu sa. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that undoubtedly, Arjuna, the senses are very strong, parani ahur, but stronger than the senses is mind, indriyabhya param mana, and stronger than the mind is the intelligence, yo manasastu paro buddhe, and stronger than the intelligence is yo buddhe paratastu saha. So our original constitutional position as an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Sri Krishna is the strongest influence in our existence. And what does that strongest influence say? It says to just be. I think that is the most important thing, being. And that's why the humans are called human beings. What is the reason humans are called human beings? They're not called human doings. Even though we do a lot of things, we're not called human doings. We are called human beings. What is the reason for that? Because our original existence is in being. So we have to be first, and once we are in existence, then we can do anything. Without existence, nothing can be done. But one of the conundrums of this existence is that the existence itself is totally pure, totally blissful, and it has nothing to do with whatever is being done. There is a total. So in chemistry, they have this concept of catalyst. In chemistry, in chemical reactions, there is a component called catalyst. The catalyst, what is the role of the catalyst? The catalyst is present in a chemical reaction to enhance the chemical reaction. But by itself, it does not participate. So that is our original existence. In our original state of being, we are just being, and we are directly linked to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, the original activity of ours is always to remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the natural position of all the living entities. That is what is mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita when it says, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabo Noy, Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Koroy Udoy. So, what does that mean? That verse is saying that the love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is eternally present in the heart of all the living entities. It's not something that is external to the living entities. It is always there within the living entities. Sadhya Kabo Noy. It's not something that one has to go outside to attain. How does one understand that one has that love for the Lord? Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Koroyoda. So the Shravanadi, when one is hearing about the Lord, what is happening is Shuddha Chitta. The consciousness is becoming purified. So what do I mean by the real consciousness is always separate from all other things. But what I'm saying is the false ego, the covering of the consciousness by the means of the false ego, that is getting purified. So one is understanding that actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead is owning everything, and he owns me as well. And what I have to do is just become his instrument. So this is what Krishna says to Arjuna, nimitta matram bhava savyasachi. So Krishna says to Arjuna that you just become an instrument to Arjuna. And Arjuna has got that humility. And therefore he says, Shishyasteham sadhi mam tvam prapannam. Karpanya dosho apahata svabhava pruchami tvam dharma samoda cheta yashreyasyan nishitam bhuvi tanme shishyasteham sadhi mam tvam prapannam. So that humility is extremely important. When there is that humility, one knows that Krishna is actually in charge. Everything is moving under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not even a blade of grass moves without the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this, when one is convinced of this fact, and when one acts with that conviction, then one is in a state of total surrender. So that is that was the state of Maharaj Ṛṣabhadeva here mentioned. Yoga cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām. So he was practicing jaḍa yoga. So this jaḍa yoga, there is sama-loshta ashma kanchana. It is mentioned in jnana vigyana triptatma kutastho vijatendriya yuktityuchyate yogi sama-loshta ashma kanchana. It is mentioned by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita that when one is totally satisfied with the knowledge and the application of the knowledge, which is the science, jnana vigyana triptatma, totally satisfied in Krishna consciousness, jnana yuktityuchyate yogi sama-loshta ashma kanchana. So for such a person, there is no difference between stone and the gold coin. And that is the highest state of, that is the word paramahaṁsa used here. Yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti. So that is the third line of this verse. So the third line and the second line are connected that way. So when one is totally surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is this verse where it says that when one is padam yat vipadamna tesham samashritaye padapallava plavam mahat padam punya yasho murare bhavam budhir vatsapadam padam yat vipadamna tesham. So in that third line there is this padam āmananti. The padam is there, yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti. And when we look at the word by word here, so the highest stage of perfection, the learned stages who are situated in that, accept it. So this is when one is totally surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, samyak rupena ashrita, total surrender, samashritaye pada pallava plavam. So this lotus feet of the Lord is considered as the ship that will help one to cross the ocean of material existence, the ocean of continuous birth and death. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jathare shayanam, iha samsare bahudustare, kripaya pare pahi murare. So Sri Shankaracharya says in Bhaja Govindam that this is the unfortunate situation in this material world, that one is constantly taking birth and one is constantly dying. One is constantly in the womb of different types of mothers. Punarapi janani jathare shayanam, iha samsare bahudustare. And this material world is very difficult to come out of, because there is this, since time immemorial, the living entity has been taking birth. And this taking of birth is every time it is making the living entity to develop attachments to this material world. Each and every birth is causing the living entity to get attached to the material world. And when this attachment is happening, one is not realizing one's original constitutional position as an eternal part and parcel of Krishna. So that's why Krishna says, Manaha shashtani indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. The struggle in this material world happens when there is identification with the mind and the five senses. But when we know that we are an eternal part and parcel of the Lord, there is this constant remembrance of the Lord. This Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnum, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So there are 9 kinds of devotional service. So actually, we'll come to that now. Srila Prabhupada actually mentions in the purport about how in this age, this Jada Yoga practice is not, especially this Jada Yoga practice is not possible for the people who are not in the Paramahamsa stage. The Paramahamsa stage is the stage where the living entity does not forget the Lord even for a second. That was the stage of Maharaj Ṛṣabhadeva. And therefore, he was able to practice Jada Yoga, where he, because of his absorption in the loving devotional service of the Lord, he was totally oblivious to whatever was happening. In the material sense, he was not at all bothered about what was happening to his body. If it was going through tormentation, he did not know it. If people were disrespecting, he did not know it, because he was totally absorbed in his mind. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosime. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that always remember me, think of me. Man mana bhava mad bhakta, become my devotee. Madhyaji mam namaskuru, offer your worship to me, offer your obeisances to me. Mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosime. So Krishna says to Arjuna that, "O Arjuna, you will surely come back to me." Why I'm telling this to you? And this is the truth. And why I'm telling this to you? Because you are very dear to me. Pratijane priyosime. So this is the transcendental position of someone who is remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tava kathamrutam tapta jivanam kavibhiriditam kalmashapaham shravana mangalam Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam bhuvi grananti ye bhurida jana. As it is mentioned in Gopi Gita, when one is hearing about the nectarian pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Katha Amrita. So it is the nectarian pastimes of the Lord. One comes out of the blazing fire of material existence. Bhavam Buddhi. So it is called Bhava Ambudhi. Bhava means this constantly one is taking birth and constantly one is dying. And it is called the ocean of birth and death. So this ocean of birth and death becomes, the water becomes like a hoof print of a calf. The water in the hoof print of a calf. Bhavam Buddhi Vatsa Padam, Param Padam, Padam Padam Yat Vipadam Na Tesham. So even though in the material world there is a lot of this difficulties, but for a person who is totally surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there are no difficulties. Why? Because bhayam dvitiya biniveshadha syat. Ishad apetasya vipareyo asmriti. So the fear, so the biggest problem in this material world is fear. So what is the fear? The fear is that one might accumulate lots and lots of different things, but at the end one has to give it up. So the fear of losing things. So the first fear is in terms of the anxiety that one has in terms of accumulating things. So first of all, one has to accumulate. So this is the na shochati na kankshati. So one is kankshati and one is shochati. So kankshati is one is hankering. So whenever that is the nature of this material senses and material body. One is always hankering in terms of satisfying the senses, and when the senses get satisfied with an accumulation of the object that it wants, that satisfaction is temporary, and that satisfaction fuels another hankering, and then when that hankering is satisfied, it fuels another hankering. So it is a non-stop process of getting entangled in the network of sense gratification. So how does one come out of this? Sukham atyantikam yattad buddhigrahyam atindriyam veti yatra na chaivayam sthitas chalati tattvata. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that when one understands the inner bliss, when one is reveling in that inner bliss, when one is totally focused in that inner bliss, sukham atyantikam, that kind of happiness is something that is not anything related to the senses coming in touch with the sense objects. That is totally independent of that kind of happiness. This vishya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that when one gets that higher taste, automatically one gives up the lower taste. So what is that higher taste? The higher taste is when we understand that our real bliss is within. It is not dependent on acquiring things and the senses gratifying in association with the sense objects. That is temporary. So yehi sansparshaja bhoga dukkha yonayavate adyantavanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddha. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that when the senses are coming in touch with the sense objects, sansparshaja bhoga, that is the dukkha yoni. So Krishna actually mentions that when the senses are coming in contact with the sense objects, it is the womb of sorrow, dukkha yoni. Why is it a womb of sorrow? Because that temporary happiness does not last permanently. As an eternal beings, our focus is on getting something permanent. And the body and senses are made in such a way that it cannot access permanent happiness. It has to. That is the nature of this world. Dvandvaya vimukta. Sukha dukkha nirmana moha jitasanga dosha. Adhyatma nitya vinivritta kama. Dvandvaya vimukta sukha dukkha sangya. Gachyantya mudha padam avyayam tat. So this material world, it is dvandva. The nature of the material world is, it is duality. That is duality. So when one is experiencing the happiness, one has to experience sorrow also. Similarly, when one experiences sorrow, one can experience happiness also. When there is day, then there is night also. When there is night, there is day also. So this duality is the basis of the material existence. And the spiritual existence is based on that pure bliss, which is totally eternal. So that's why it is called atyantikam yatad buddhi grahyam atindriyam. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that spiritual happiness is atindriya. It surpasses all the material sense gratificatory type of happiness. So therefore, ramante yogina anante satyanande chidatmani iti rama padena asāv param brahma vidiyate. So it is mentioned in the scriptures that the real, like the yogi mentioned here, like Ṛṣabhadeva, they are in the state of pure bliss, which is totally different from the highs and lows of the material world. The experiences of happiness and sorrow that happens in the material world, it is temporary. So as yehi sansparshaja bhoga dukkha yona evate adyantavanta kaunteya. So the nature of this sense gratificatory happiness is that there is a beginning and there is an end. Adi and anta. Adyantavanta kaunteya. And therefore na teshu ramate buddha. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that a really intelligent person does not get entangled in the sense gratificatory happiness. And so if the senses are coming in touch with something that is pleasing, the person feels happy. If the senses are coming in touch with something that is displeasing, the person gets unhappy. And this cycle of happiness and unhappiness continues. But a really spiritual person who understands that this is temporary does not get entangled by that. So that's why we in the Yoga Sutras, there are pancha kleshas mentioned, the 5 kinds of impurities that exist in the conditional state of existence. And it starts with avidya. It starts with ignorance. The ignorance is the ignorance about our eternal nature. So when there is ignorance about our eternal nature, And this eternal nature is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it has got eternal bliss. It does not go through this ups and downs that we have in this material world. It is constantly blissful. So this is that is a state where one can understand that all these changes that are happening in this material world, we are perceiving those changes because there is something that is constant in us. There is this. Krishna actually mentions as well in Bhagavad Gita about how there is all these changes are being. Even if you look at the physics, in physics there is this law of relative motion. So if two trains are going in the same direction at the same speed, and one person in this train is looking at another person in this train, they will feel as if they are not moving at all. Why? Because both are moving in the same direction at the same speed. So this is so we are noticing all these changes that are happening externally because there is something within us which is unchangeable. And this is what Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita. Achaloyam Sanātana. Achedyohim addahyohim akledyo ashoshevacha nitya sarvagata sthanur achaloyam Sanātana. So our real constitutional position is such that we cannot be cut by weapons. Achedyohim addahyohim. We cannot be burned. Akledyo ashoshevacha. We cannot be made wet by water. We cannot be dried by wind. Nitya sarvagata sthanur. So we are eternally existing. Sarvagata, the living entities are present everywhere. Sthanur, they are based everywhere. Achaloyam Sanātana. So this is the constitutional position of all the living entities. And that is what we are Tattvamasi. In the Vedic Vakyas, it is mentioned that thou art that. So we are, and it can only be realized in human form of life. And this is another important thing that needs to be understood. And therefore, Lord Ṛṣabhadeva actually says to his son, Nayam deho bhajam nrideha. So, kashtan kaman arate vidbhujanye, tapo divyam putraka yena shuddhyat sattva, yasmat brahma saukyam tvanantam. So when one understands one's constitutional position as an eternal part and parcel of Krishna, then all this material ups and downs is not felt in the same way as someone who is totally attached to it. So the attachment to all these material ups and downs comes because of ignorance, the ignorance of our original constitutional position. So when there is ignorance, there is asmita. The asmita means one identifies oneself with the body. That is asmita. So there is avidya, asmita. And when one identifies oneself with the body, there is raga and dvesha. So raga is whatever one likes, one is attached to it, and dvesha is whatever one dislikes, one is totally displeased by it. So one is totally under the influence of the environment in that condition. So if the environment is really good, one is really happy. If the environment is really bad, one is totally sad and depressed. So one becomes the servant of the environment. And so instead of that, if one comes from the inner perspective, then when one knows that the externally all the senses and the interaction of the sense with the sense objects is temporary. So sometimes I might get happiness, sometimes I might not get happiness. So in that state, one is in the state of equanimity. So this is sukha dukkhe same kritva labha labho jaya jayo tato yuddhaya yujyasva naivam papam avapsyasi. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that when one is in that state of equanimity, so there is sukha and dukkha. When there is happiness and distress, one is in the same state, same kritva. Labha labho jaya jayo. If there is profit or when there is loss, when there is victory or when there is defeat, whatever be the condition, because the nature of this material world is duality, dvandva. So that's why Krishna mentions dvandvair vimukta, sukha dukkha sangye. So the qualification of being spiritual, Krishna mentions what is the qualification. First is nirmana moha. First of all, one should not have any pride and any attachment. It is easier said than done, as we say in this material world, in this material existence. Not having pride and not having attachment is easier said than done. But when one comes from the place of attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it becomes easier. Therefore, it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chaya Dahetukam. So when one has got this loving devotional service to Krishna, automatically there is Vairagya and Jnana. Automatically there is renunciation and transcendental knowledge. In the impersonalistic philosophy, one is going after the knowledge, transcendental knowledge, which is based on impersonal philosophy. And the devotional service is considered as a secondary aspect to the primary aspect of developing transcendental knowledge. Aham Brahmasmi. But in the devotional service realm, pure devotional service automatically gives everything else. So this is the beautiful prayer from Bilva Mangala Thakur, where he says that Mukti Swayam Mukulitanjali Sevate Asman Dharmartha Kamagataya Samaya Pratiksha Bhakti Swai Bhagavata Bhagwan Yadi Syad Daivena Na Phalati Divya Kishora Murti Mukti Swayam Mukulitanjali Sevate Asman Dharmartha Kamagataya Samaya Pratiksha. So Bilva Mangala Thakur says that when one has got that unalloyed devotional service to Krishna, Daivena Na Phalati Divya Kishora Murti. So to that wonderful Radha Krishna form, when one is attached and one has unalloyed devotional service, then Mukti Swayam Mukulitanjali Sevate Asman. The Mukti Devi is coming in front of that unalloyed devotee with folded hands and saying that I am available to you. Who is Mukti Devi? The goddess of liberation. What to speak of the other things, which is the economic development, sense gratification, and religiosity. So in the Vedas, it is mentioned about the four purusharthas, chatur purushartha, and that is the religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So in the normal sense, these are called the goals that the human being should aim for in the human form of life. But the highest goal is prema pumartho mahan, the love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When that is developed, automatically all the other four goals are achieved. And one of the conundrums of being in that state of love for the Lord is that one is not wanting anything. Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kame. Mama janmani janmani ishware bhavatat bhakti rahitu kvitoi. As it is mentioned by Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says that I don't want money, O Krishna. Na dhanam, na janam, I don't want followers. Na sundarim kavitam, I don't want a beautiful partner. Va jagadisha kame, I don't want fame. Then what do you want? Mama janmani janmani ishware. Says that birth after birth, Ishware, bhavatat bhakti rahetu kitoi. Let me have unalloyed devotional service unto you, O Lord. This is the transcendental position of pure devotional service. And that is the position that Ṛṣabhadeva is internally in. Externally, he's showing the symptoms of jaḍa-yoga-caryām, as it is mentioned here. So in that jaḍa-yoga-caryām symptom, he is totally oblivious to his body and any experiences that the body is having. It's totally, because his mind is totally focused. Savai mana Krishna padaravindyo. Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunanu Arnane Karo Harer Mandiram Arjanadishu Shritim Cacāra Chita Satkatodaya Mukunda Lingalaya Darshane Drishau. So this is mentioned about Ambarish Maharaj. His mind was always focused on the lotus feet of Krishna. So that was the state of Ṛṣabhadeva internally, and externally his state was jaḍa-yoga-caryām. We also see this in the life of Bharat Maharaj, and Bharat Maharaj is mentioned as well in this as the son of Ṛṣabhadeva. Srila Prabhupada, in the end, he actually mentions the simple method of hearing from the right source, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, will lead one to the highest perfectional stage of yoga. Ṛṣabhadeva was the son of King Nābhi and the grandson of King Agnidhra, and he was the father of King Bharata, after whose name this planet Earth was called Bharatavarsha. So here it is being mentioned about Bharat Maharaj as well, and we can talk briefly about Bharat Maharaj, where we see that he renounced his empire and he was in the forest, and then he wanted to save that fawn, and because he wanted to save the fawn, he was with the fawn and he got attached to the deer and he became deer in the next life. So we see in the life of Maharaj Bharata that even though he was at the stage of bhava, so this is the transcendental position in which there is this existence where even at the stage, so we have got this different stages of engaging in the loving devotional service of the Lord. So there is this adav sadhu sangha, tata bhajana kriya, tata anartha nivritti syat, nishtha ruchi asakti bhava. So different stages where one is practicing the devotional service. First of all, when one is in touch with the devotees of the Lord, sadhu sangha, then one practices devotional service, bhajana kriya. Then when one is practicing the devotional service, one gets rid of all the things that are not conducive for devotional service. So that is anartha nivritti. Then one has nishtha. So when one develops strong faith, when one has strong faith, then one has ruchi, one gets taste. Asakti, then one develops attachment. Then bhava. So there is this experience of emotional sentiments in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees. So Bharat Maharaj was in that state, and after bhava is prema. That is the highest stage. Krishna prema pradhayate. Namo mahavadanyaya Krishna prema pradhayate. Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya namne gauratishe nama. So Srila Rupa Goswami, when he saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he composed this prayer for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He said that, "O most munificent incarnation of the Lord." Why are you most munificent? Because Krishna prema pradhayate. Because you provide the love for Krishna to all the living entities, which is the highest goal in this human form of life. There is no higher goal than that. Because once one is in love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is in one's original constitutional position. And in that original constitutional position, one is in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when one is in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it does not matter where one is located. Narayana parasarve na kutaschana bibhyati swarga apavarga narakeshu apitulyartha darshana. As it is mentioned in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, and when one is totally surrendered onto Narayana, Sri Krishna, then one is not afraid of anything. Then one can either be in the heavenly planets, one can be in the hellish planets, or one can be in the earthly planet or the middle planetary systems. It doesn't matter. Apitulyartha darshana. So one is totally in the state of absorption in loving devotional service onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that was so. Bharat Maharaj, in his second life, he had to become deer. But when he got a third life again as a human being, even in the life of deer, he was always in association with the saintly people, and he was hearing about the Lord wherever he can. And in the third life, as Jada Bharat, so we see here. So here jaḍa-yoga-caryām. This is Ṛṣabhadeva, and his son was also in his third life. He was practicing that Jada Yoga. So where externally he was portraying himself as totally oblivious to everything else. Internally he was, and that's why externally automatically it became shown. And he was very cautious as well in his third birth that he does not develop any kind of attachment, because he knew that he was very close to going back home, back to Godhead, but that attachment to that deer caused him to take a life of deer in his next life. So he was very cautious in his third life. And he actually practiced this jaḍa-yoga-caryām that is mentioned here by Ṛṣabhadeva in context of Ṛṣabhadeva. So the third line is yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti. The last line is svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. A very beautiful line. So svasthaḥ. So this is very important. The svasthaḥ word in Sanskrit, svasthaḥ also means that when one is in a healthy state of existence, and svasthaḥ has got a very important meaning that when one is situated within oneself. Svasthaḥ. Swa means inside, and stha means situated. So when one is internally situated, then one is healthy. What is the cause of unhealth? It is when there is anxiety, when one is always hankering after something. So if one is always hankering after something, one is not in the present and one is not grateful for what one has currently. And that causes a lot of problems, physical problems as well. So it is amazing how mind itself can cause dis-ease, and mind can cause ease. So therefore it is said, mana eva manushyanam karanam moksha bandhane, bandhaya vishaya sanga mokshaya nirvishayam mana. So the mind itself is a cause of bondage and liberation. When the mind is attached to things, it is in bondage, and when mind is detached to everything else, it is in liberation. So this is the svasthaḥ. When one is situated within oneself, when the mind is not going out in all the hundreds and thousands of different directions, but the mind is situated within the self, that is svasthaḥ. So that is svasthaḥ. Then when the mind is situated within the self, then there is praśānta-karaṇaḥ. So it becomes very peaceful. The whole material senses become very peaceful, because the agitation of the material senses is caused by the mind hankering after thousands of different things, and the mind hearing thousands of different things through the medium of ear. Shrotavyadini rajendra nrinam santi sahasrasa apashyatam atmatattvam graheshu grahamedina. As it is mentioned by Srila Shukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj, that one hears thousands and thousands of different other subjects, Shrotavyadini Rajendra. Why? Because apashyatam atmatattvam. Because one did not see one's original constitutional position as an Atma, as an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then one is in the state of parimukta-saṅgaḥ. Those are the last two words in this verse. And that is really a beautiful way to end this verse, parimukta-saṅgaḥ. So when one is totally free from all kinds of material contamination or attachment. So that is the state that can be experienced in human form of life. In no other form of life, one can experience this parimukta-saṅgaḥ. When I say no other form of life, in the material situation, no other form of life. In the spiritual situation, every form of life is in parimukta-saṅgaḥ. It is perfectly liberated, perfectly free from material contamination. And the spiritual variegatedness is present in the spiritual world, and the material variegatedness is a reflection of that spiritual variegatedness. Urdhva moolam adar shakha ashwatham prahuravyayam chandamsi yasya parnani yastam veda sa vedavet. So this is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, that the roots are at the top and the branches are at the bottom. So where do we see that? We see that in the reflection in a river. So that is the material world. So what does it mean? That means that the variegatedness or the variety is present in the spiritual world as well. But the variety in the spiritual world is based on pure spiritual existence. It has nothing to do with matter. That is the variety in the spiritual world. So in the material world, the variety is based on matter. And the issue with matter is that one cannot experience permanent happiness in matter. So therefore, if we try and understand these verses together, somehow or other we'll hear Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And when we hear Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we will understand our original constitutional position as an eternal part and parcel of Krishna. So to conclude, this is the verse, nābher asāv ṛṣabha asa sudevi-sūnur yo vai cacāra sama-dṛg jaḍa-yoga-caryām yat pāramahaṁsyam ṛṣayaḥ padam āmananti svasthaḥ praśānta-karaṇaḥ parimukta-saṅgaḥ. The Lord appeared as the son of Sudevī, the wife of King Nābhi, and was known as Ṛṣabhadeva. He performed materialistic yoga to equibalance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated in oneself and is completely satisfied. With this, I would like to conclude this discussion. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gaurani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu Krishne Materastu. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. So I'll just put in the comments here that we have seen. So we have comment here and comment here. Satyaprada Devidasi, thank you very much for your comment. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.